Hello and welcome to Ananke's third edition of Women in Literature Festival. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome this amazing panel titled Illustrated Resistance. And I'll begin with a little bit about the panel. So Illustrated Resistance is the panel we're going to focus on. Art and the visual has played a pivotal role in the socio-political history of humanity, existing since the time when mankind had limited modes of communication as well as vocabulary. It is an organic canvas representing ideas, shared and otherwise, riveting emotions and angst. Keeping in mind the role of art as a fearless and many a times non-conforming tool of expression in terms of resistance, Ananke's Women in Literature Festival unveils a fascinating panel discussion, Illustrated Resistance. And with me are these amazing panelists. And I begin with Ita Mehrotra, who is a visual artist, researcher, and educator based out of New Delhi. Ita creates nonfiction comics, illustrated text, and animation, stemming most often from engagements within sociopolitical shifts around her and in unraveling their particular histories. Her work has been published and exhibited by TheWire.in, Popular.org, Zuban Books, Goethe Institute, Yoda Press, Ad Astra Comics, Memento Festival, among others. Her book, Shaheen Bagh, a graphic recollection, published by Yoda Press 2021, brings together moments and memories from the anti-CAA protests over 2019-2020 across India. She's currently creative director of Artreach India. So welcome, Ita. Samya Arif is an internationally featured visual artist, illustrator, and graphic designer. Her practice focuses on observation of social and cultural paradigms from a woman's perspective, embodying women and spaces and the spaces they inhabit. After graduating from the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture Communication Design, she has created visuals for various publications, music artists, book covers, and film posters. Samya has been featured in the New York Times, the BBC, Vice, CBC, The Fader, and Pitchfork. Her projects include clients such as Penguin Books, HarperCollins, Macmillan Publishers, Al Jazeera, and the US Embassy in Nepal, British Council, NPR, and Google. She has been a regular illustrator at Pakistan's renowned Herald magazine. Her work has been exhibited in Pakistan, India, UAE, England, US, Belgium, and Spain. Samya currently lives and works in Karachi, Pakistan, is a part-time professor at her alma mater. So welcome. Wait. All right. Next, we have Kirti Jayakumar. She's a lawyer, feminist, researcher, and WPS practitioner, and a good, great friend of mine. I wanted to add that. She founded and runs the Gender Security Project, which works on the WPS agenda and feminist foreign policy through research, reportage, and documentation. She obtained her MA in Peace and Conflict Studies at CTPSR, Coventry University, and previously at UPeace, Costa Rica. She's a member of the working group for the Every Woman Treaty and part of the advisory working group for Beijing Plus 25 process. Welcome, Kirti. Sadhna Prasad is aka Press, is a multidisciplinary artist and storyteller currently based in Mumbai, India. Through her practice, she explores themes of relativity, education, feminine power, the local and everyday through a cultural context and alternate lens. She has been a practicing artist for the last 10 years and was the co-founder, art director, and lead artist with Aravani Art Project for 6 years until July 2022. I hope I've pronounced Aravani correctly. Her work is in a constant state of experimentation and evolving, and she is currently exploring senses, textures, routines, and working towards being a mix of multiple disciplines and mediums relevant in a local and global landscape. Welcome, Sadhna. Chandri is an artist with the Aravani Art Project since the last 7 years. Being a trans woman, she works with the collective painting walls and advocating for opportunities, equality, and oneness. She's extremely hardworking and committed to all areas of practice. Apart from painting, she has a keen interest in music, dance, and is a foodie. Aravani Art Project aims to embrace the transgender community by creating consciousness well-being through art, awareness, and social participation. While the visibility of transgender people is increasing in popular culture and daily life, they still face severe discrimination, stigma, and systemic inequality. With a mission of attempting to reduce this in society, they bring about change in the way the society views the community. So, welcome, Chandri. And over to you.
Chandri just wants to say hi.
Hi.
Hi, good to hear from you.
Hi.
She's going to be on call with me. I'm so sorry. She's not able to access the app on her phone.
Absolutely fine. Over to you, Kirti.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Welcome, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're signing in from to listen to us. And welcome, Chandri, Ita, Sadhna, and Samya. I'm really, really grateful. I have followed all of your work individually and the Aravani project for several years now, and it's just been a delight to have the opportunity to ask you these questions that have been bubbling up inside of me, and to just hopefully bring to fore a few more questions from the audience members. Before we get started, I just want to place on record a few things in the interest of housekeeping. If you are a guest with us here on the Zoom link, please make sure that you remain muted. You can turn on your video if you want, but please remain muted so that all of our listeners can enjoy the benefit of listening to our speakers. If you have questions, please keep them coming on the chat function. I'm going to try to be as mindful of time and your questions and try to bridge the two and make sure that at least some of those questions are answered before we close out. Finally, as is always the case with panels, especially online panels, we do talk about sensitive topics that can have potentially triggering impacts on some people, not necessarily within their domain to control or even anticipated. Should you find yourself being triggered or challenged by anything that you're hearing in the moment, feel free to step away from the screen and jump back in when you find that that speaker has changed or the individual has likely moved on to something different. If you're on the Zoom link, you could also pick a buddy in the chat room and let them know through a DM that you're stepping away from the screen so they can make sure to let you know when it's fine to come right back into the chat. On that note, welcome, Ita, Sadhna, Chandri, and Samya. I'm saying it exactly in the order that I'm seeing on my screen. I'm adding Chandri along with Sadhna. For those of you who didn't catch the message, Chandri will be speaking to us through Sadhna. Chandri has unfortunately not been able to access the software itself, but Sadhna will be helping us hear Chandri's voice directly on the call. Okay, so I want to start by inviting all of our speakers to weigh in on the key question that we're meeting with today at Illustrated Resistance. What does art mean to you as a tool of resistance in the work that you do? Perhaps in the interest of making the sharing order comfortable now, may I invite Ita to share first, followed by Samya and Sadhna, and then Chandri together. Is that convenient? Go for it, Ita. I see you unmuted.
Yeah, thanks, Kirti. I'm so happy to be here and talk to other artists across places. I think a lot about, what art is it's many things. It's not just one way of working or, one kind of artwork that comes out of it. But for me, over the years, it's become a way to respond to the moment, to various political shifts that are happening around me. So, for instance, the anti-CAA protests that happened, that started against communal laws in India coming in over the past few years against minority communities, listening to women who are protesting. What does one do as writers, as theater people, as citizens? One responds, And so that first bit is really like just coming back with one's voice and saying, oh, I've heard this is important. Women at Shaheen Bagh are saying what they think of citizenship, of India, of nationhood, and this is what I'm going to make as a drawing. So I think the first initial bit is in how many ways can we respond? And then the second bit that's coming over time is developing dialogue. Because unlike just text or educative propaganda, what art can do is leave room for multiple perspectives, for making theater or writing that is not just informing, but giving space. And I see that as being urgently super important across, whether it's in the country, across places, because we're seeing, people becoming more polarized. The way social media or mainstream media works is to kind of box you in or trying to spread hate, actually. So when I think of art as ways that open up space, because there can be art that's doing the opposite as well. And I don't think that's art then. It's not art, it's propaganda. So what is art actually for me at this point is to make those distinctions. And it's therefore a very political sort of intonation, not political in terms of which party you belong to, the political bit of being human beings, of being citizens, of being aware, of raising questions, all that sort of work. Yeah. And of course, it's very beautiful. I love to look at beautiful things. Yeah.
So well said, and thank you for starting us off on that really powerful note. So I'm going to go over to Samya. Samya, would you like to unmute and share?
Yes, hello everyone. So happy to be here and meet you all in person. I think Ita put it quite beautifully. I think my experience has been quite similar to hers here in Pakistan as well. I've been making art for consecutively for the past 2 years for the Aurat March that's been happening in Pakistan for the past 4 or 5 years, and which has been in response to the increase of violence against women generally in the country. And so just you know sort of creating a dialogue based on those issues, which has been really interesting as well, because all the artwork and all the posters that were created throughout these 5 years for the Aurat marches have received a lot of backlash in Pakistan. Whether it's from the fundamentalist people in the country or even just the older generation, who don't understand the issues that the women we are facing today in the country. So just starting a dialogue and making people aware, and even if there's backlash, just making sure that our voices are there in the mix as well. Whether it's in the form of, the chants that you do at the protests or the art that you create. Um, and I think it's been a very important way to sort of make our issues, heard. Yeah.
I absolutely love the focus on space making and space taking. Thank you so much for that, Samya. From there, I'm going to move over to Sadhna and Chandri. Sadhna, perhaps you could take it first and then Chandri, that's comfortable.
Yeah. Actually, I'll take it from what Samya said about space making. I am somebody who learned traditional design as I come off it. So I unlearned quite a few things in the last 10 years about art itself, because I learned the very technical side of graphic design and animation, and I was out there to enter a field which was extremely technical as well. But I ended up doing a lot of murals, and then starting the Aravani Art Project, which of course through the last 7-8 years has of course changed my mind, because we are working with a really marginalized community in India itself. It has opened the perspective of the women we work with, and while enabling them, it is also because we do paint in public spaces, and we used to paint in public spaces, it has opened the public's eye to how they perceive these trans women as well. So even though I was part of the collective or not, that I'm not now, I think I always think that art belongs to everybody and it should be accessible to each and every person. And that is the only probable thing that I work towards. And we as a collective also used to work towards that. It has to be accessible and it has to be easy for everybody to express and adopt it if they need to. Let me just ask her in Tamil. Hello, Chandri. உனக்கு ஆர்ட்னா உனக்கு என்ன மீனிங்னு கேக்குறா சொல்லு. இங்கிலீஷ்ல சொல்லு இல்லன்னா நான் டிரான்ஸ்லேட் பண்றேன்.
டிரான்ஸ்லேட் பண்ணது.
ஓகே ஓகே.
ஃபர்ஸ்ட் நாங்க நினைச்சது ஆர்ட் வந்துட்டு அது கத்துக்குன்னு அது படிச்சுதான் வரணும்னு நினைச்சிட்டு இருந்த ஆர்ட். ஆனா அப்புறமா தான் தெரிஞ்சு இது நீ சாத்னா பூர்ணிமா அந்த மாதிரி ஆளுங்க டிரான்ஸ்ஜெண்டர் அடையாளம் கண்டுபிடிச்சி எங்களுக்கு training கொடுத்தீங்க நீங்க. சரி ஒரு நிமிஷம். So she thought that art was something that you have to be trained for, that you have to go to college and you have to be able to learn it. They learned very late that it's actually a form of self-expression. It's not really something you really have to go and learn unless you enter the technical space. சரி சொல்லு. அப்புறமா தான் எங்களுக்கு தெரிஞ்சு கத்துக்கிறது தான் ப்ரோசஸ். நீங்க வாங்க கூப்பிட்டீங்க. கத்து கொடுத்தீங்க. அப்புறமா அந்த பெயிண்டிங் பண்றது அந்த டிசைன் பண்றது அதுல ரொம்ப எங்களுக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாச்சு. ஆர்ட்னா ரொம்ப எங்களுக்கு பிடிச்சது. ஏன்னா பப்ளிக் ஜனங்க கேட்கிறாங்க நாங்க ஒன்லி செக்ஸ் ஒர்க் பேக்கிங் தான். அப்புறமா தான் எங்களை நீங்க அடையாளம் கண்டுபிடிச்சி ஒரு பெங்களூர்ல ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணீங்க வச்சுன்னு. அப்பதான் எனக்கு அந்த கலர்ஃபுல் பண்றது அந்த டிசைன் பண்றது அதுல கொஞ்சம் எங்க ஃபீலிங்ஸ் எங்களுக்கு எவ்வளவு கஷ்டம் இருந்துச்சு அதெல்லாம் அது பண்ண எங்களுக்கு எல்லாம் அதெல்லாம் மறந்துச்சு. ஓகே. So I think she's saying that for her, art also gave her her identity in public because she used to be looked as a trans woman who used to either go for sex work or begging. So I think this looked at her beyond her gender and beyond her sexual preferences. I actually looked at her interest in what she wanted to do. It's also a very good let out for the community because they enter a safe space where they talk to everybody else and each other in color and form, and it's not about gender or sex that they're discussing. அப்புறமா வெரி பெங்களூர்ல இல்ல இப்போ நிறைய இடத்துல வேற வேற டீம் இருக்கு. பெங்களூர், சென்னை, ஜெய்ப்பூர், டெல்லி, பாம்பே அந்த மாதிரி இடத்துல எல்லா ஜனங்களும் ட்ரைனிங் பண்ணி இப்போ பெரிய சின்னதா இருந்துச்சு. இப்போ அர்வாடி அப்ரோச் வந்து yeah. So over the last 8 years, parting knowledge to each other, the team has grown really large and it's all over India and painting multiple murals. Yeah. சரி. இப்போ நிறைய பேர் வந்துட்டு இப்போ ஜாயின் ஆயினே இருக்காங்க. எனக்கு இன்ட்ரெஸ்ட் இருக்குன்னு இப்போ நிறைய பேர் அவங்களா வராங்க. சரி. ஓகே. That's why many people from the trans community initially a lot of them showed a lot of resistance because they have been subjects of interviews and films where they really don't get anything out of it. So there is no possible extra opportunity that arises for them. So there's no change that they've seen in their life happening once they give all these multiple interviews. So they had approached even us the similar way because they were and it took us a good 3-4 years to build trust. And now it's reached a stage where they are aware that a project like this exists and they want to come and interact with the project.
Okay. Sorry, Sadhna, was there more?
No.
Did catch a bit. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chandri. இது உங்களுக்கு காதுல விழுதுனா மிக்க நன்றி நீங்க சொன்ன பதிலுக்கு. நீங்க என்ன சொன்னீங்களோ நல்லா ஒரு அளவுக்கு காதுல விழுந்துச்சு. ஆனா சாதனா எங்களுக்கு நல்லா கிளியரா இங்கிலீஷ்லயும் புரிய வந்தது. All right. So, folks, thank you so much for setting the stage with the works that you each individually do. Just for context, for those who are listening in without perhaps knowledge of Tamil, I was just thanking Chandri, and I was also letting her know that what she shared was audible in some pieces, but we got to hear most of it with Sadhna's translation. Right. So I want to just go back to some of the points that each of you made. And Ita, you talked about how on the one side, the piece that comics bring alive is a chance to talk about very difficult conversations. And on the one side, they're so beautiful. You like looking at beautiful things in the form of art in itself. Can we talk a little bit about how comics and the comics that you have, perhaps if you're comfortable sharing, that you have created have helped have or open up spaces for some of the difficult conversations that we need to have today?
Yeah, sure. So going back to, I think I want to look at, say, the CA protests again as an example of a long process of working. So there's protests happening against the communal laws. And in 2019 winter, this was across the country. It started off with Delhi and Shaheen Bagh, and then women, across the country. But within these spaces of protest, it's also not one thing that people are saying. It's actually, when the protest started and lasted for 3 months, it grew into a platform of dissent of many, views around, say, demonetization in India, about unemployment, about just citizenship, and many people from different walks of life, religions, coming together to also come in and put in their bit. So for me, working with a method like comics making, it gives me the space to not just have like one voice, but say what are young people within the country, from Muslim women from Shaheen Bagh saying, what are Sikh people coming in from Punjab and cooking for the protesters, what are they doing? What is the children and young people coming and staying there, being, days and nights? So this kind of way of bringing multiple opinions and different perspectives together is something comics allows for, And beyond that, I also feel like this, as opposed to mainstream news, if you have something that's childlike, often comics have been considered, children's material for the longest time. I think in the West, there is an understanding of political comics for a longer period. But here, there's political cartoons in newspapers, but comics has been, for children. So that sort of subversion that happens allows, again, for one to maybe say some of the things that a lot of news is not going to allow for. So to be able to create, what is secularism today? What does the Constitution, what value does it hold within the country? Some of this cannot be done right now in, say, mainstream publishing and mainstream news. So I think the thing is that artists are always thinking and responding to these, So when it's murals, when it's comics, I think that articulation is possible right now still. So as a comics maker, I feel like it's able to hold some of its kind of playful, childlike, humor, while also bringing in these questions, while also doing it through diversity, not collapsing views to mean one thing, but to stay with the complexity of it. And so even the most childlike methods are actually, like, children do these things actually in very complicated ways. I think as adults, we like to say one thing, be one thing. But that's not how it is. It is a complex society. We are many religions, we are many cultures. And let's have art forms that can also do that. There's text that's visual on one page of a comics book. You actually have many visuals. And they speak to each other. They sometimes contradict each other. And I love working that way. I love being able to do many things with a page, and also something with the words, something with the visuals, and leaving a lot of room. So it's not packed with information. There's actually a lot of space, which is meant for the viewer to also think. It allows for that engagement. You're not filling it up with information. It's actually like a cooler medium in that sense. So that's something that's very attractive for me as comics, to be able to do this kind of discursive thinking, of allowing for space, but also saying many things. So with the Shaheen Bagh book, for instance, it allowed me to talk to younger women from the community, to talk to older nannies and dadis, and have their perspective, thinking back of partition, of like the history of claiming, India as theirs, of younger people saying, what do we think of the future of this country, which is suddenly asking us to prove our citizenship. We won't do that, and we claim it, so we're not second citizens. So all of these things are coming. And also, as you're saying, of the bit of just art, of that beautiful bit that comes in, for me, that's important as ways of just working with lines and drawing that maybe allow it for people to rest in the moment. So to not look away too fast. How can you stay? How can you pause? How can you literally, as a viewer or a thinker, if I look at a beautiful image, it's not just, oh, how nice is this, or how well is this drawn, but its ability to let you stay, to take a deep breath, and let you, remain with the present a little bit. Yeah, so these are some of the ways that I feel comics have worked well with me. And of course, they've reached, as Sadhna is saying, the bit of being able to communicate to diverse audiences. It is something that I've been surprised as how much it's gone back to schools, to colleges, to maybe not. This book was in English and some of my work is much more in English, but still people who are not speaking that much of English are able to pick it up, just because it's visual heavy. So I feel like that bit of saying democratic dialogue making through the arts is very important for me as well. Yeah.
That was beautiful, Lita. Thank you so much. As a first-hand consumer of your comics, I can very well say that the moment to pause, to reflect, I think exists in every frame. I found myself journaling alongside reading and consuming your work. So thank you for those seeds of thought. Samya, you talked extensively about, well, to the extent of the time that we gave you, about space making and space taking. But one of the interesting pieces about observational work is the gaze in the observation. And when perhaps in a place like the Aurat Manch, which is filled with diverse women who represent multiple intersections of identities and contexts and backgrounds, how does gaze factor when you're embodying space through art?
I think that's a really interesting question. Definitely with the Aurat March, I think gaze comes to play, a lot of ways. It also sort of, I think, depends on what kind of gaze we're talking about, because then firstly, there's the external gaze, which is mostly all men. So even wherever we are for the Aurat March, I think so far, like it's been happening in all the major cities of Pakistan, and wherever it's happening, like it's surrounded by the external city, wherever it is, and that's mostly made up of men. And that's where you get the feedback also from, because they're the ones who are watching it happen, and they're the ones who feel sort of like they don't understand what's being said, or they don't agree with a lot of things that are being said through art, or I think other means. But it is interesting because, like I said, a dialogue has been started because of that. So the gaze has sort of led to it. But as makers, like as the creative people, we're making the art. And if we take in our gaze, like, what are we trying to sort of convey through our art? It's all these multiple issues that maybe that are not just centered around women, but because it's a feminist movement, it's a women's movement, and it's trying to be all inclusive. So, the trans community, the working class community, are minorities and people who, often face persecution in Pakistan, are included in that entire conversation. And that's very important for them to be present, whether in the for them to be present, whether it's the march, or for their opinion, or their sort of story to be told through the art posters. um, so I think that's really interesting. But when we're looking at creating art to embody spaces in Pakistan, I think it becomes a bit of a sort of, I wouldn't call it a battle, but it is sort of, you're trying to take up space which is not really given to you. So you're kind of fighting for that space. And then you also have to be, to a certain degree, very mindful of what you're creating in that space, especially if it's a public space. So we've had a lot of instances where the Aurat March posters were put up in public spaces, and they were very angrily sort of torn away within the next day, or they had stuff redrawn on them, and there was one that it was like the artwork was really badly desecrated in Islamabad. So these are things you have to be prepared for. Even the last time I made a mural in Karachi, it wasn't anything, it was just two women sort of interacting with each other in a very playful and sort of love giving, um, that was the meaning behind the art. And the women kind of ended, like we just created, like it was a collaboration with my other friend who also does a lot of art, in the form of resistance. And sort of creating space. And we were told to sort of, like, the women were only drawn to their shoulders, and the shoulders were kind of bare. But we were told that we must cover the shoulders because that was not acceptable to some of the men in the area where the mural was created. So, in the end, we just sort of, we're like, this is not a big deal for us. Like, you have to decide what is worth fighting for. We wanted the mural to exist in that space, so we just kind of made these transparent bubbles around the mural. So we're like, okay, we have to find a middle ground where it doesn't upset the people that it's been created for in that space too much, but they also get what we're trying to say. So I think and also public art, like how I think Sadhna was also talking about this, which is in Pakistan. I see more of it in India, but there's a huge scarcity of public art in Pakistan, and it's very sad. I feel the art culture here has sort of become where it's catered for a certain class of people in certain spaces where it's exhibited in galleries, and then at the end of the day, that artwork's going to end up existing in a certain home where certain people can interact with it. And the average person that's on the street in their daily life, there's barely, like, almost zero interaction with art. And I think that kind of slowly kills the culture also that's existed for us as a subcontinent for, thousands of years or not more. So yeah, definitely there's a need of bringing public art, but also, since you're dealing with so much sensitivities, whether it's culture, society, or religion, we have to be slightly mindful, even though I'm all up for being rebellious and, bringing the whole system down. But as we've seen in the past, you can't just, jump to that. You have to go in a certain a way around it. So yeah, that I think that's where I feel we're at in Karachi or Pakistan.
Thank you, Samya, for also naming the archetypal incarceration of art as we know it. I mean, it's been something that's outlived us all and generationally existent across the subcontinent. So it's no wonder then that the system turns to it as a mechanism of recovering itself and to re-entrench itself. So I'm going across the border with one point that Samya raised, which is space for trans folk in movements and specifically involving art as well. So my question to you, Chandri, and Sadhna, with your consent, maybe I'll give Tamar.
She has dropped off and
No
I'm not
worries.
able to reach her. So maybe I do my question first, and if I can reach her, I'll ping you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking on the
No.
extra responsibility of being the conduit for Chandri. We have the tendency to assume that art is just a visual experience, right? Okay, so I got a notification that my internet is unstable, so I'm going to double back and take that from the start. So we tend to assume that art is a visual experience involving just perception. But you work with multiple textures, multiple forms of media, and each of those are also a conversation piece. Can you tell us how textures, perhaps in different forms of media, come into play in dialogue making?
Yeah, I think I have always maintained that whatever art, initially I didn't, like I said, I come from a background where I was a designer. So I was always in the middle of figuring out where I belong and if I have to belong to a certain space, is when I started creating a lot of work based on after a lot of research and purposeful art. The 10 years that I've spent being a muralist, all the art that we create are site specific. And we've also realized that these artworks in the end belong to the people who live there. They hardly belong to us. So even if I want to say something, I need to be able to convince that to the people while I am painting. But maybe the art itself is about something that all of us believe in together. So we conduct a lot of workshops with the people who are around, just to sensitize them on who we are painting with, why we are doing the painting. But what we paint again is a mixture of what we want to depict and what the community wants to depict as well, in terms of where they stand politically, where they stand in terms of what they want to say. because we don't come from the space, right? We come externally, and we don't want to be somebody who just come and put something on the walls and go, and the community then has to live with it or be answerable as to what is on the wall. Hence we do conduct a lot of workshops where we are constantly asking them what do they want to say, and if they want to say something, why is that they want to say that. And then we come up, kind of transform what we get from the surroundings into a visual language and put it across. It's of course definitely very important that it also looks very good. I think when we were a part of Aravani, initially my biggest thing was I did not want people to look at what Aravani was doing as a pity thing, that, oh, they're transgenders painting, so maybe if it's not good, it's okay because it's just an NGO doing things. It was very important that the quality of what they saw was equal to any quality, and it was not just about just amateurs, for the lack of a better word, coming together and just putting colors on a wall. It was very important that they realize that this is something they are taking seriously as a form of expression, and as a form of rebellion to make their own space in the public space. I think hence the research that goes for creating that art is really important.
Yeah, thank you so much for also sharing about the educational component that goes into making art also accessible, because it speaks a language and some people may not be up to speed with consuming or even speaking that language. So thank you for centering that. In the interest of time and also acknowledging that we hope to have Chandri back on track, I'm just going to go forward with one last question. But if Chandri joins us before, I'd love to also include her voice in this. Now, not to sound capitalistic when I ask this question, but in a manner of speaking, the intention behind producing art for consumption, and as I heard from all of you, is to produce change, or at least a route to change, which means that we have an eye on the prize in terms of impact when it comes to the impact of art. What does that look like? And I'd love for any of you and all of you to share. And if we're going with all of you, the sharing order would ideally be Ita, Sadhna, Samya. That's comfortable.
Yeah,
Or
sure.
anyone who's ready to start.
Anybody, I'm grateful. Yeah, so I think it is definitely like this circulation, distribution, how one makes it is big questions for any of our countries because of the, accessibility, language, where you're standing, where one is coming from, all of that shifts it. And so I've also been thinking how, one as an artist doesn't have to work in one single way. Like, I feel like there's some things that social media does. And so, for instance, even when protests begin, there's this urge to do calls to action type of posters. And, doing that in as many, I speak Hindi and English, so at least using two languages. And then there's this other bit, which I feel like the longer work, the longer projects for me are also not just about change making, but record keeping. There's so many things that are ongoing, which are just like being brushed under the surface or not being amplified enough. So voices of minority communities or voices of opposition to the mainstream, laws ruling party. And the way that if women are saying things, they're not saying one thing. So then multiplicity of voices. So that record keeping, bit of archiving work from, looking at the ground realities, that's something that for me, the process of journaling almost, as you said, is, what does it mean every day to take note through drawings, and also collecting visuals across, critiquing what's happening every day. So I feel then it becomes one node, one part of a much bigger process of change making, because that I don't think anybody can sort of shoulder, and I don't think any artist can also, like, it's a tricky space because one is also always going to be on the outside a little bit. You're sort of standing outside and looking at, and one enjoys that space as an artist. I feel like I want to kind of not have all the burden of saying, oh, now I need to tell you what to do. It's much more of examining, looking closer, saying, yes, this is happening, let's look at it, let's hear these voices. So then it becomes one part of what activists. It's been interesting how a book like about Shaheen Bagh has been used by activist networks, whether that's within the same issues or even slightly different, whether it's women's rights, rights of Muslim women in India, but also different, also about democratic dialogues. The other bit that I work with in Outreach India is to do workshops, and as Sadhna was also saying, of like how do you work with the community itself. And that again is huge when it goes between art and craft as well, craft forms in the country. What do we say? Who are artists here? There's this plethora of people who worked with various material in the country, and that politics of saying, oh no, just us trained people are not artists. Actually, there's many. So the outreach and doing these programs allows me to also identify and give grants as much as possible to people working within their communities and break this kind of hierarchy to whatever little extent, and also work with children, young people, instrumentalizing to some extent those forms of comics making, visual storytelling, and do it as engagement. So then there, I feel the capitalist urge is subverted because nothing is not towards creating product at all. It's actually all reversed towards being processed, So I often feel that art making happens in those as that engagement. That's the big production. That's where it is. It's very ephemeral, but it leads to change right then, right there. You suddenly create space where children and young people can imagine what nationhood is, to make wild and free drawings. So these are, programs that go into Rohingya refugee camps in Delhi, go into very marginalized communities. And even at Shaheen Bagh, for instance, for me, it started with book, but it's gone into working with the children, young people in the community. And so as an engagement, it goes from one to another. It evolves also.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you, Ita. Sadhna, Samya, I would love to invite your comments. We do have a time crunch though, so if you could keep it under a minute each. Thank you.
I think it's
Sadhna, you're muted.
yes, sorry. I think it's very hard to measure or to even expect. I'm so sorry. To even expect an impact. I think for me, if there is even one person in the form during a project or during any such thing, there's only one person or five people who look at the painting and who think of what we are trying to say, or who just look at a group of women painting or a group of women and trans women painting and have a question in their head. That's a good start for me, because because our duty is to just keep doing, and they are going to continuously see us doing. And that is what we've been doing for the last 10 years, is just keep on doing what we're doing. And that has, of course, escalated the impact from what I have seen in the last 10 years. But I think it's very, very small. Of course, social media does play, I think, a huge role. It's also because the online community is really looking out for each other and really promoting each other. And I think that also helps. But it's a very tricky way of gauging how impactful art is. I think, especially at Arvani, if it was even changing one trans woman's life for us, that was enough impact, as equal as if it was changing the public's perspective as well.
Thank you, Sadhna. Samya?
I think they've covered everything that I would want to sort of add. I think one thing that I wish would happen more often are collaborations, within the South Asia context, because each of us individually, I mean, in our countries are doing so many amazing things. And, each of the countries has put their name on the map with the art they're creating. But it would be so great just for our entire sort of region. Sorry, there's some construction happening. I hope you guys can still hear me. But yeah, so just more collaborations. And I think that's a way of bringing like different points of views together. So that would be amazing.
Beautiful. Setting the intention for exactly that, for in the words of Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, South Asian women and queer people have never been limited by cartographic considerations. So may that be the intent for all of you to come together in one way or another. Ita, Sadhna, Chandri, Sadhna, in the hope that you could convey it to her, and Samya, thank you each for your wisdom, for your experience, your expertise, and your brilliance in today's conversation. And more power to each and all of you in all that you're setting out to do ahead. This was a delight, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have just heard all of you firsthand.
Thank you.
Back to you, Sabine.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, everyone. Samya, Ita, Chandri, Sadhna, and of course, Kirti. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Sabin. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you. It was really lovely to hear everyone.